Have you ever looked at someone, a colleague, a former classmate, a so-called influencer, and just felt a visceral sense of confusion? It is the kind of confusion that keeps you up at night. You see them. They are the person who takes credit for other people's work, who weaponizes gossip like a blunt instrument, or who looks at other human beings as if they are simply stepping stones to a bigger paycheck. And yet, they are surrounded. They are always surrounded. You scroll through social media and see them at the center of the group photo. You hear about their weekend plans, packed with people clamoring for their attention. They have a gravitational pull that seems to defy all logic. You are not stupid. You know they are not nice people. You know the mask they wear. You see the cracks in the veneer. But society seems to disagree. The world, your world, seems to be convinced that this person is a superstar, a leader, the life of the party. So why? Why do the worst people you know have the most friends? It feels deeply counterintuitive, doesn't it? It challenges everything we are taught about morality and the human connection. We are raised on a diet of fairy tales and movies where the good guy wins, where the kind-hearted protagonist is rewarded with love and community. We are told that if we are honest, empathetic, and hardworking, we will be surrounded by loyal friends. But then we look at reality, and we see the Machiavellian figure climbing the social ladder with alarming speed. We see the narcissist holding court in a room full of admirers. We watch the manipulator build an army of followers, while the genuinely good people, the ones who show up, who listen, who actually care, are often left sitting at home on a Friday night, wondering what is wrong with them. This is not a coincidence. It is not a cosmic glitch in the matrix. It is a horrifyingly predictable system. It is a system where the mechanisms of popularity are entirely broken. Mass popularity rarely overlaps with the qualities that make someone a genuine friend. So let's examine that disconnect. Let's take the scalpel to the myth of popularity and dissect the truth. It is not you. It is not a moral failing. It is a psychological flaw in the very fabric of how we build tribes. And once you see how it works, you will never look at the popular person the same way again. Part 1. The allure of the mask. Why does it feel like everyone is drawn to the very person they should be running away from? You see it, but why don't they? Or maybe they do see it, and they just don't care. To understand this, we have to start in the brain. Specifically, we have to look at what many psychologists call the dark triad. This is a cocktail of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Now, these words sound heavy. They sound like they describe serial killers or dictators. But in reality, these traits exist on a spectrum. Many of the popular people you are thinking of right now exhibit a lighter version of these traits. And it is precisely that version that makes them so socially lethal. Let's look at the first ingredient: high extroversion. To be a popular person, to build a massive network, you have to be on. You have to be loud, energetic, and constantly engaged. People who are introverted or highly conscientious often struggle with this. They conserve their energy for deep conversations, for the people they really care about. They cannot perform social energy for hours on end. But these individuals we are talking about, they are social athletes. They can run the marathon of small talk and backslapping all day long. They can work a room like a politician on the campaign trail. They shake your hand a little too firmly, they lock eyes a little too intensely, and they say your name with a warmth that feels completely disproportionate to your relationship. In that moment, that very first moment, they are charismatic. This charisma is rarely genuine. It is often a weapon. It is the surface-level shine that attracts people long before the underlying toxicity becomes apparent. It is the bright, flashing light that draws the moths to the flame. Here is the kicker. What you perceive as supreme confidence and magnetic energy is often just a cover for a fragile ego. Narcissists project this aura to shield themselves from their own internal emptiness. They are putting on a costume of success, and because the costume is so convincing, nobody questions it. They just see a leader. They see someone who has it all figured out. But this is where the trap is laid. When you meet someone like this, you are not meeting a person. You are meeting a performance. What happens when you start to get close to them? What happens when you try to move from being an audience member to being a co-star in their life? That is when the magic trick starts to fall apart. Part 2, the audience, not the friends. The first major lie we have to dismantle is the word friend itself. Think about the popular person you have in mind. Think about the crowd that surrounds them. Do you truly believe every single person in that crowd is a friend? Do they all share secrets? Do they show up at 3 a.m. when someone is crying on the kitchen floor? Of course not. Conscientious people, the ones who are genuinely good, invest deeply in a few reciprocal high-effort relationships. They have 4 or 5 people they could call in a crisis. They help with the move. They sit in the silence when someone is grieving. They do the hard work of friendship. Toxic personalities don't do that. They don't have the patience or the empathy for the hard work. Instead, they build broad, superficial networks. They treat relationships as a volume game. It is about reach, not depth. It is about the sheer number of followers, not the quality of the connection. In this view, people are not confidants. They are an audience. You know this feeling. You have felt it. You have been in a social situation with this person, and you felt like you were in the front row of a one-man show. The conversation doesn't flow, it is a monologue. They are looking through you, not at you. They are talking to the crowd, checking who is watching, making sure the spotlight stays on them. They are maintaining their brand, not building a relationship. This is the quantity over depth approach. They can amass 100 friends online because they send out a generic happy birthday to everyone. They can fill a bar for their birthday because they have a list of 300 contacts they can blast a message to. But ask yourself, if this person lost their job, their status, or their money tomorrow, how many of those 100 friends would show up? How many would actually answer the phone at 3 a.m.? You know the answer. Deep down you know it. But society doesn't see that. Society just sees the packed bar. It sees the Instagram story with the 30 smiling faces. It perceives that volume as popularity. It perceives it as proof of value. We are conditioned to think, if that many people like them, they must be great. It is a classic, dangerous, logical fallacy. We mistake volume for value. But here is the twist. The truly manipulative ones know this. They know we are fooled by volume, so they don't just passively collect friends. They actively engineer the situation to create this illusion. They are social architects, and they are building a fortress of followers around themselves. What happens when you try to leave that fortress? Part 3. The strategic mind. Let's move from the psychological to the strategic. The people we are discussing are not just accidentally popular. They are often working an intricate system. They are Machiavellian. They study group behavior like a scientist studying a petri dish. Machiavellianism, in psychology, describes a person who is manipulative, who uses deception and cunning to achieve their goals. They view people as pawns and social interactions as a game to be won. They know exactly what they are doing. Love bombing. One of their favorite tools is the targeted injection of praise, often called love bombing. They are experts at finding the thing you are insecure about, the thing you desperately need to hear, and saying it to you. They walk up to you and say, "Wow, your presentation was brilliant. I was trying to figure out how to approach that project, and you just nailed it. I could never do that. So I love your style, it's so unique. I feel like everyone here is the same, but you just have this vibe." Why do they say this? They are not just being nice. They are creating a debt. They are making you feel indebted to them for the validation. They are pulling you into their orbit. They are making you want to be around them. You will start to crave that validation. You will start to seek it out. Maybe you will find the urge to trying to impress them, trying to get that next hit of praise. They have just hooked you. Favor trading. But they aren't just giving praise. They are also incredibly good at what you might call favor trading. They do something small for you. A small favor, a piece of information, a heads up. You feel obligated to return the favor. Over time, they build a network of people who owe them. They don't have to ask for loyalty. It is engineered through obligation, dominance. And then there is the darker side, dominance. They aren't afraid to be the center of attention, even if it means stepping on people to get there. They are often high-conflict personalities. Think about the historical context for a moment. Niccolò Machiavelli, the philosopher and writer of The Prince, famously observed that power and utility command far more social cohesion than moral goodness. He wrote that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, if he cannot be both. Why? Because love is fickle. held by a bond of gratitude that, when the opportunity arises, men will break. Fear, however, is held by a dread of punishment that never fails. This echoes through society today. People cluster around individuals who control status, access, or entertainment, even when they privately dislike them. If a person can get you into the room, get you the promotion, or simply make you feel like you are on the inside and everyone else is on the outside, they have power over you. You will tolerate their bad behavior because the alternative, being excluded, being an outsider, feels worse. And this is the point where it gets really interesting. When you combine the dark triad traits with this Machiavellian strategy, you get an individual who doesn't just build a network, they build a prison. What happens when you realize you are in that prison and you try to break out? Part 4, the prison of the in-group. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the concept of master morality and slave morality. He argued that we often mistake overt aggression and self-interest for genuine strength. We see the loud, the confident, the dominant, and our lizard brain says, that is a leader. But what is actually happening is often a grim, survival-based choreography. Toxic group leaders are masters at creating strict in-groups and out-groups. The in-group is the circle of chosen people, the people who are in the know, the people who are allowed to bask in the glow of the leader. The out-group is everyone else, the threats, the competition, the nobodies. Self-preservation and fear. Why do people stay in these circles? Is it out of genuine affection? Sometimes, yes. People get addicted to the drama, the excitement, the feeling of being part of something bigger than themselves. But more often, it is out of fear. Fear is a powerful motivator. We are wired to avoid ostracization. For early humans, being cast out of the tribe was a death sentence. We couldn't survive alone on the savannah. We needed the group for protection, for food, for survival. That genetic memory is still there. When we are part of the in-group, we feel safe, we feel protected. We feel like we are on the winning team. And here is the dark genius of the toxic leader. They weaponize this. They create a situation where the cost of leaving the circle, the cost of calling them out, is social suicide. They make people believe that if they leave, they will become the next target. They will be the one excluded. They will be the one gossiped about. So they stay silent. They watch them mistreat someone else. And they breathe a sigh of relief because, at least it's not me. But they are trapped, clinging to a social position built on quicksand. But here is the ultimate irony. What if the person who is out is actually free? What if the person who is sitting at home on Friday night, the person who is excluded from the popular group, is actually the one who has won? Part 5. The evolutionary glitch. To understand why we are so susceptible to this, we have to go back to the caveman days. We have to look at the evolutionary dynamics that shaped our brains. In early human groups, aligning with aggressive, resource-controlling individuals offered physical protection. If we were a hunter-gatherer, we wanted to be on the good side of the strongest, most aggressive warrior. We wanted to be in his coalition. He had the meat. He had the power to protect us from rival tribes. He could lead the hunt. In that context, we didn't care if he was a jerk. We cared if we survived the winter. We cared if our children got to eat. We retain an evolutionary impulse to seek proximity to high dominance figures, regardless of their ethics. Opportunistic alliances. This is why you see the same dynamics play out from ancient royal courts to modern office politics. History is full of people who flocked to the powerful, even when they were monstrous. Look at the court of a medieval king. The nobles would laugh at his jokes, agree with his insane policies, and flatter him endlessly, not because they loved him, but because they feared losing their land, their titles, their heads. Look at a modern corporate boardroom. The ambitious junior executive will play golf with the arrogant CEO, laugh at his offensive jokes, and agree with his terrible ideas. Not because he respects him, but because he wants the promotion. In both cases, individuals unburdened by strict moral constraints form alliances much faster. When relationships are strictly strategic, expanding a network requires zero emotional investment. You don't have to genuinely care about someone to use them. You just have to be willing to play the game. So you have these systems, the psychological attraction to the mask, the strategic manipulation of the crowd, the primal fear of exclusion, and the evolutionary pull toward dominance. It creates a perfect storm. But what happens to the people who are morally good? What happens to the ones who can't play this game? And more importantly, what happens to you if you refuse to play it? Part 6. The loneliness of the good. Let's take a moment to talk about the person you might be thinking of right now. This is the person who does the right thing, who shows up, who listens, who gives without expecting much in return. This is the person who is conscientious, empathetic, and deeply invested in their relationships. And society, the world, the vicious popularity contest, it has left them behind. It has left them feeling lonely, confused, and angry. They look at the toxic person with the 500 friends, and they ask, "What am I doing wrong?" This is a profound moment of self-doubt. It is the moment where they start to think that maybe they are the problem. Maybe they need to be louder, more aggressive, less caring. Maybe they need to betray their own values just to get a seat at the table. And this is the tragedy of the system. It punishes the good. It makes them question their own goodness. They start doing something. They start performing. They try to be louder. They try to be more interesting. They try to play the game. They post more on social media. They try to be the center of attention at the party. They try to trade favors they don't really want to trade. And it feels hollow. It feels exhausting. It feels like they are putting on a mask, and everyone can see right through it. This is the cognitive dissonance. Their brain is screaming at them that this is wrong, but their social anxiety is screaming at them that they have to do it to survive. But let's reevaluate the situation. Let's look at the popular person's life from a different angle. Do you envy the person who has to keep track of 500 different relationships just to maintain their status? Do you envy the person who is constantly looking over their shoulder, fearing that someone is going to usurp them? Do you envy the person who feels so empty inside that they have to fill their life with noise and validation? That isn't success. That is a symptom of a deep, unhealable wound. Imagine the toll it takes. You have to constantly be on. You have to constantly police your behavior. You have to constantly manipulate and scheme. There is no rest. There is no authentic self. Does it really worth it? The person sitting at home on Friday night, the person questioning their own worth because they only have a few genuine connections, that person has something infinitely more valuable. That person has reality. If you are that person, if you are the one who feels like an outsider looking in, take a moment to reconsider the scoreboard. Do not look at the most friends leaderboard on social media. It is a lie. Look at the people who make you laugh until you cry. Look at the person who picks up the phone at 3 a.m. Look at the person who knows your secrets and keeps them. Those are your people. Don't let the noise make you forget the signal. The system is designed to make you feel like you are missing out. It is designed to make you chase the shiny, superficial validation of the crowd. It is designed to make you doubt your own moral integrity. But you are not missing anything. You have escaped the trap. You are free from the exhausting performance of the social circus. So the next time you see the worst person you know surrounded by a sea of fake smiles, feeling that pang of jealousy, don't pity them. Because while you have a few genuine friends to share your life with, they have a prison cell full of inmates. And that in the end is the real tragedy. They are trapped. You are free, remember that. Because the mechanism that manufactures mass popularity rarely overlaps with the qualities that make a true friend. And you, the good person, the empathetic person, the person who is hearing this, you already won.